Welcome. Whether you are prepping for a big meeting, catching up on some history, or you're just insanely curious, we're thrilled to have you here.
Yeah, really glad you could join us today.
You are our dedicated learner, and today we have a deeply custom-tailored deep dive just for you.
A really fascinating one, too.
Oh, absolutely. If you were to take a stroll through Woolwich today, down by the River Thames in southeast London, you would find this, well, a really familiar modern scene.
Right, very typical.
Yeah, it's quiet, it's suburban. You've got these sleek, newly converted waterfront flats, people walking their dogs along the paths, maybe, a nice pub overlooking the water.
It's idyllic.
It feels completely, perfectly peaceful.
It really does. It has that very specific, settled energy of a modern residential development. I mean, you'd never look at that peaceful water and feel overwhelmed.
Not at all.
It just looks like a nice place to spend a Sunday.
But if you peel back the layers of time, if you look at the history buried right into those brick pathways in modern flats, that quiet neighborhood completely vanishes.
Completely disappears.
Right. And in its place, you find this thrumming, cyclopean, 12,285-acre military-industrial behemoth.
Which is just a staggering scale.
It is. A place so massive, so loud, and so dangerous that it literally forged the British Empire. We are, of course, talking about the Royal Arsenal.
And the sheer scale of what happened on this specific patch of dirt is, well, it's almost hard to comprehend today.
Yeah.
We're looking at a transformation that perfectly mirrors the birth of the modern industrial world itself.
Which is exactly our mission today. We're pulling from an incredible stack of material for this one.
Some really great archaeological stuff.
Yeah, specifically excerpts from a deeply detailed survey called Historical Topography and Riparian Evolution, along with this fantastic chapter on the Royal Arsenal from University College London.
Both are excellent resources.
So our mission today is to trace the astonishing evolution of this site. We're going to uncover how a riverside rabbit warren attached to a Tudor mansion somehow transformed into the beating heart of Britain's imperial war machine.
It's quite the jump.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to understand the behemoth, we actually have to start small. Back in the 1530s, right, with a guy named Sir Martin Bowes.
That's right. So Sir Martin Bowes was a wealthy goldsmith. He was a key figure at the Royal Mint.
Okay.
And he decides he wants a nice riverside estate, a gentleman's playground within easy reach of the royal court at Greenwich.
Makes sense.
So he acquires this land and builds Tower Place.
So I'm picturing like a modest little cabin by the water.
Oh, not even close. This was the absolute picture of Tudor leisure and wealth. He built a 5-story octagonal tower with an ogee cap.
Wait, pause. An OG cat.
Yeah.
I'm picturing a wizard hat. What does that actually look like?
That's actually not a bad comparison. Think of a dome, but instead of a simple curve, it has an S-shaped curve that tapers up to a point.
Okay, got it.
Very elegant, very complex to build.
Yeah.
And he built this massive tower, basically just so he could go up and enjoy the panoramic views of the river traffic.
Just for the view.
Basically, yeah. He had orchards, he had moats, and importantly, he had this large open space behind the house that he partially enclosed as a private garden and a rabbit warren.
A rabbit warren, like literally just an enclosed field for furry little animals to hop around and breed so he could hunt them or eat them.
Exactly. Completely pastoral, very peaceful.
So how on earth does a peaceful Tudor rabbit farm turn into a weapons factory?
Well, it's the ultimate bad neighbor scenario.
Oh, no.
Yeah, the Board of Ordnance, which was the government body responsible for the military's munitions, they already had a storage depot nearby.
Right.
And over time, military officials start looking over the fence at this nice, flat, open rabbit warren and thinking, you know what, that looks like a great place to test fire cannons.
Wait, they just start firing artillery into the guy's backyard?
Pretty much. They casually started using this gentleman's open space to prove or test their guns.
That is wild.
Right. And over the next century or so, the state eventually just buys the land outright. So it slowly transitions from a quiet estate into a sprawling storage depot for the military.
Okay.
But for a long time, it's really just that. It's just storage, a place to put carriages, timber, and gunpowder.
Right. Until something goes horribly violently wrong.
Yes.
Because storage is one thing, but manufacturing is a whole different beast. It's 1716, and the British military is still outsourcing the actual manufacturing of their bronze cannons, which they confusingly called brass cannons back then, to private contractors.
Right, which was standard practice.
Right. And one of these contractors is a man named Matthew Bagley, who has a private foundry in Moorfields, London.
Yeah, and Bagley is hosting this major event. He's invited ordnance officials, military brass, and other eminent figures to his foundry to witness the recasting of captured French guns.
Like a big PR stunt.
Exactly. It's a huge public spectacle.
Yeah.
But, well, the historical record suggests that the molds he was using for these massive cannons were damp.
Oh, man. And if you know anything about pouring molten metal, moisture is your absolute worst enemy.
What's fascinating here is the sheer, unforgiving physics of the disaster.
Yeah, break that down for us.
So when you pour thousands of pounds of molten bronze into a mold and that liquid metal hits trapped moisture, that water doesn't just boil.
Right.
It instantly turns to steam. And steam expands to over 1,000 times the volume of the original water in a fraction of a second.
Wow.
Because it's trapped under heavy liquid metal, it essentially becomes a bomb.
That is terrifying.
It is. The result was a devastating explosion of liquid bronze. 17 people were killed instantly, including Bagley himself and his own son.
Oh, that's awful.
High-ranking military engineers were severely burned and injured. It was a horrific tragedy.
You know, if we think about this in modern terms, it's like, imagine a massive global corporation relying entirely on a third-party outsourced contractor for their most critical proprietary hardware. Suddenly, that contractor suffers a catastrophic, very public, and deadly failure that kills the company's own executives.
Yeah, it's a worst-case scenario.
Exactly. What does the corporation do? They panic, and then they pivot aggressively. They say, never again. We are bringing this entirely in-house, and we are building our own internal infrastructure from scratch, no matter the cost.
That is precisely what happened. The Moorfields disaster completely forced the British state's hand.
They move fast.
Very fast. Within just 6 weeks of that explosion, the Board of Ordnance decided to stop outsourcing completely. They brought bronze gun manufacturing directly under state control, and they chose that open land at the Woolwich site as the location.
Wow.
That single explosion forever changed the destiny of that riverside rabbit warren.
It's crazy, but I'm looking at my notes on what happens next, and I'm genuinely confused.
Oh.
Because, okay, when a global empire decides to suddenly build a massive weapons factory in the early 1700s, they run into a very specific problem.
Okay.
Nobody actually knows what a giant factory is supposed to look like. I mean, the Industrial Revolution hasn't really happened yet. If factories don't exist, what blueprint is the surveyor even using?
They didn't have one.
Real.
Yeah. Large-scale gunmaking had traditionally been a rural craft, often just done in large barns. So when the Surveyor General, Michael Richards, was tasked with building the Royal Brass Foundry at Woolwich in 1716, he had almost no architectural models to work from.
So he just had to guess.
He had to improvise completely.
So they essentially build a barn in fancy dress.
That's the perfect way to describe it. Internally, the foundry functioned much like a giant barn or a church basilica.
Okay.
It had a long, tall central nave with continuous low aisles to house the massive furnaces. But the timber roof structure was an absolute marvel of inventive carpentry.
How so?
Well, Richards used these massive, heavily reinforced king post roof trusses. And they weren't just there to keep the rain out. They were designed to act as a heavy-duty gantry system.
Because you have to move these things. A bronze cannon weighs thousands of pounds.
Exactly. The roof itself had to support the weight of solid bronze cannons being hoisted up and down by men pulling ropes. It was a machine just as much as it was a building.
That's brilliant. But on the outside, they absolutely refused to let it look like a barn.
No, not at all.
They wanted it to look important. The builders actually painted fake brickwork, a technique called trompe-l'oeil, on the outside of the building.
Right, to hide the timber framing.
Exactly, to make it look like solid masonry. And they built this squat tower at the end to house a horse gin boring machine.
Which is literally just a giant treadmill where a horse would walk in a circle all day.
Right.
Just powering a drill that bored out the center of the cannon barrel.
Right. And they dressed the whole compound up with all this ridiculous architectural flair.
They really did.
They built a massive compound called the Great Pile, complete with a beautifully gauged brick entranceway known as the Dial Arch. And my notes say this arch featured battered pylons topped with pyramids of cannon shot and pseudo-machicolation.
Yes.
Okay, decode this for me. What are battered pylons and what is pseudo-machicolation?
Of course. So battered in architecture means a wall that intentionally slopes inward as it rises.
Okay.
Imagine a thick, heavy pillar where the base is much wider than the top.
Like a pyramid.
Similar, yeah. It makes the structure look incredibly fortified, heavy, and imposing, like an ancient Egyptian temple.
Ah, got it.
And metropolitan refers to those little defensive gaps you see jutting out at the very top of medieval castle walls.
Oh, where defenders would drop boiling oil on attackers.
Exactly.
But wait, this is a factory in London. Nobody's laying siege to it with swords and boiling oil.
Exactly. That's why it's pseudo. It was completely fake, purely decorative. It was designed to look like a fortress.
Wait, it gets weirder. They even had a looted 1st to 3rd century AD Egyptian statue, a moon god, dug up by troops in Alexandria, just casually sitting out in the factory yard.
Yeah, just as a decoration.
Why? Why put so much architectural flair into buildings that are essentially just dirty factories for casting cannons and storing wooden carriages?
Well, because in this nascent stage of the Industrial Revolution, architecture was the primary language of state power.
Oh, interesting.
The British Empire couldn't just build a functional shed. I mean, even their utilitarian buildings had to project grandiose ambition and total authority.
It's all about optics.
Completely. It wasn't just about making guns efficiently. It was about communicating the immense might of the state to anyone who walked through those gates. They were building cathedrals of war.
Cathedrals of war. I love that. But that architectural hubris eventually hits a wall, or rather, it hits a swamp.
It definitely does.
Because as we move into the early 1800s during the Napoleonic Wars, the demands of the military reach a completely unimaginable scale.
Yeah.
The empire is fighting massive land and sea battles across the globe.
The scale of production needed was unprecedented.
Right. They need storage for supplies, and they need it yesterday.
And this is when we see the proposal for the Grand Store, a project spanning from 1806 to 1813. The architects, James and Lewis Wyatt, drafted these absurdly grandiose plans for what they called sea storehouses that included a domed, colonnaded office block right on the river.
This is massive.
Yeah, it was meant to be a monumental gateway for ships arriving from the Thames.
And monumental meant expensive.
Very.
The accounting from this project is absolutely staggering. The foundations and the wharf alone, along with the storehouses, cost over £670,000.
Which is an astronomical sum.
Yeah.
To put that £670,000 in perspective, that was more than half the cost of the entire West India Docks complex in London.
Wow.
And the West India Docks wasn't a single building. It was a massive, sprawling commercial port with multiple docks and warehouses that handled a huge percentage of global trade.
Right.
So spending half that amount on one storage facility for the military was mind-boggling.
It got so out of hand that a military engineer, Colonel Morse, had to aggressively step in and scale back the architect's designs just to save money.
He had to.
He stripped away the fancy stone columns and swapped out structural iron for cheaper timber.
But you know, the real central drama of the Grand Store wasn't the ballooning budget.
No.
No, it was the battle against nature itself. Because remember where they are building this.
Right by the river.
Right. They were trying to build massive, heavy stone palaces on top of marshland.
Ah.
Colonel Morse, trying to be economical, had decided to use fir wood piles, basically giant wooden stakes, driven into the mud,
Okay.
and then topped with horizontal timber sleepers to support these colossal brick buildings.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the logic there is just fundamentally flawed.
It really is.
It's like trying to balance a giant lead weight on top of a wet sponge.
That's exactly it.
You can put down all the wooden sticks you want, but the mud is always going to win. The sponge is going to compress.
And the mud did win. Slowly at first, but unstoppably. By 1815, just 2 years after it was completed, they started noticing major cracks creeping up the masonry.
That's terrifying for new building.
The subsidence was severe. By 1822, the eastern tower had sunk by more than 4 inches.
Which doesn't sound like a lot to a layperson until you realize it's a giant, rigid brick building. It's not supposed to bend.
Exactly. It creates immense structural tension. And then, on March 15th, 1828, the breaking point arrives.
What happens?
The north wall of the eastern tower suddenly settled another inch or two with a terrifying, massive noise that echoed across the yard.
Oh, wow.
The underground timber sleepers had physically snapped under the immense weight of the brick.
So the foundation just broke.
Yes.
Yeah.
The entire structure was compromised. They eventually had to completely dismantle that part of the building so it wouldn't collapse on people.
Which leads to my absolute favorite detail in this entire history.
Yeah.
The resolution to this problem is so brilliantly absurd.
It's so good.
In 1841, a military engineer named Lieutenant Colonel George Harding is tasked with fixing this missing wall. But he knows if he builds it out of heavy brick again, it'll just sink again.
Because the mud hasn't gone anywhere.
Right. So what does he do? He replaces the heavy stone wall with a super light timber lath and plaster wall. Just wood and plaster.
Yeah.
And then, in a complete theatrical move, he has painters painstakingly paint the plaster to trick the eye into thinking it was still the original heavy brickwork.
It is the perfect metaphor for the era.
It really is.
The illusion of unshakable imperial prominence, literally propped up by painted plaster on a sinking swamp.
Okay, so we have these incredibly expensive, sinking pseudo-castles being built on a marsh. But building anything on a swamp, driving hundreds of heavy fir piles deep into the mud, hauling stone, laying brick, that requires an immense amount of sheer physical labor.
Huge amounts.
Who is actually doing the backbreaking work of building these sinking palaces?
Well, that brings us to a very dark reality of the arsenal's expansion. The massive engineering feat known as the Ordnance Wharf, which was a 2,440-foot deep brick wharf built right into the riverbank, wasn't built by well-paid craftsmen.
No.
No, it was built using convict labor. These were prisoners kept in hulks.
Explain what a hulk is for those who might not know.
A hulk was a decommissioned, rotting ship that could no longer sail. The state would strip the masts off, moor it directly in the freezing waters of the Thames, and cram hundreds of prisoners inside to use as a floating prison.
That sounds horrific.
It was. Up to 4 of these prison hulks were anchored right off the Woolwich site.
Unbelievable.
The convicts were brought off the ships every single day to do the grueling work. They were digging mud, driving piles by hand, and hauling heavy stone.
In the cold.
Yes. They were a public spectacle, literally walling themselves in while working in freezing, miserable conditions to build the infrastructure of the empire.
The juxtaposition is just wild. Because, you had the convicts freezing in the mud, but then you look at the conditions of the actual soldiers.
Right.
Let's look at Building 11, which was built in 1740 to serve as barracks for the artillerymen. As the workforce grew, these barracks became dangerously overcrowded.
Very dangerous.
It got so bad, and disease was so rife, that the commandant at Woolwich, General Belford, formally complained that he couldn't even live in his own quarters nearby.
And not for the reason you'd think.
Exactly. Not because of the noise, but because of the horrid smells from the men's necessary houses, meaning the overflowing open latrines.
So you have soldiers living in absolute squalor, dealing with dysentery and horrible sanitation.
Yeah.
But then, literally yards away, operating out of that old Tudor tower with the OG cap we mentioned earlier, you have the Royal Military Academy.
Wait, right next door.
Right next door. You have young gentlemen cadets being taught French, dancing, and mathematics.
The contrast is insane.
It is. The renowned artist, Paul Sandby, a founding member of the Royal Academy of Arts, was actually there teaching landscape drawing and watercolor perspective to these young officers.
Unbelievable.
This raises an important question about the reality of the Enlightenment era.
Yeah.
You have the highest ideals of education and fine art gentlemen scouting picturesque landscapes in watercolor, happening on the exact same plot of land where men are dying of dysentery in squalid barracks and convicts are chained together driving wooden stakes into freezing mud.
It really puts that fancy painted brickwork and the Egyptian statues into perspective.
Doesn't it?
It was a veneer of civility over a very brutal machine. But muscle and mud can only take an empire so far.
That's true.
The demands of global war were outpacing what human arms and horse treadmills could produce. We have to talk about the dawn of the steam age.
Right. The tipping point happens in the first decade of the 19th century.
Okay.
Specifically with the creation of the Royal Carriage Factory between 1803 and 1805. Before this, everything was decentralized.
Like scattered workshops.
Exactly. If you needed a hole drilled, a man turned a crank, or a horse walked in a circle attached to one specific drill.
Right.
But the Napoleonic Wars required a level of standardized mass production that isolated muscle power just couldn't achieve.
Enter the engineering legends. We're talking about Joseph Bramah and Henry Maudslay.
Yes, pioneers.
In 1805, they bring the first steam engine and a planing machine to the Woolwich site. Later, Maudslay sends a 6-horsepower patent portable steam engine to help run the machinery.
Out with the old...
Right, the old horse mills are ripped out. But how does a steam engine actually change the physical reality of the factory floor?
It completely revolutionizes the mechanics of labor. Instead of a horse powering one machine, you now have a central steam engine continuously chugging away.
Okay.
That engine turns a massive central drive shaft. They ran spinning iron line shafts across the ceilings of the factory, and they hung massive leather belts from those spinning shafts down to the individual machines below.
That is so clever.
Isn't it? Suddenly, one single steam engine could simultaneously power dozens of different lathes, saws, and drills across a massive grid of workshops.
So you just connect your belt to the spinning ceiling shaft, and your machine has power.
Precisely. The layout of the carriage factory, a massive grid of organized workshops, smitheries, and centralized power, was an incredibly advanced model of industrial engineering.
It was ahead of its time.
It fundamentally changed how human beings interacted with their work.
So what does this all mean for you? Why are we spending all this time taking a deep dive into a specific patch of dirt in southeast London?
Good question.
Because this hyper-specific history of Woolwich is actually the blueprint for your modern world. Everything around you today, the car you drive, the phone in your pocket, the very concept of a central power source running a factory that produces standardized goods at a massive scale, that entire paradigm has its roots in places exactly like the Royal Arsenal.
Absolutely.
The pivot from a horse walking in a circle to an overhead line shaft powered by steam was the exact inflection point that created modern industry.
It was the crucible. The overwhelming demands of war forced technological leaps, organizational leaps, and architectural leaps that eventually spilled over into civilian life and changed the trajectory of human history.
Yeah.
The arsenal wasn't just a place that made weapons, it was a laboratory that manufactured the modern era.
It's just wild to think about the journey we've just been on today.
It's a lot of ground to cover.
We started in a quiet Tudor garden with Sir Martin Bowes, watching rabbits hop around his warren. And from there, we witnessed deadly explosions of trapped steam and molten bronze. We saw architects trying to build stone palaces on top of a sinking swamp. We saw convicts freezing in the Thames, right next to cadets painting watercolors, all leading up to the roar of steam engines forging an industrial behemoth.
And what's so compelling is that all of that history, all of that deafening noise, all of that innovation and suffering happened in a very defined physical space.
Just one spot.
Yeah, a space that eventually, over decades of decline in the 20th century, closed its doors, packed up its machines, and went completely quiet again.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over today. Think about the physical spaces in your own daily life.
Yeah, take a look around.
Maybe it's the very ground beneath your feet right now as you listen to this. Maybe it's a quiet, unassuming suburban street you walk down every day.
You never know.
What hidden histories of immense scale, of human struggle, and of technological innovation are buried right there? What long-forgotten empires or vanished industries are resting quietly under the pavement, just waiting for someone to take a deep dive?
It's a great question.
Because as we've seen today, sometimes the places that look the most peaceful are built on top of the loudest histories imaginable.